Hello everyone, in this history deep dive, we will introduce the topic. What if Oda Nobunaga never existed? While there are many if stories assuming if Oda Nobunaga had lived, there are almost no stories assuming the reverse. This is likely because it is difficult to imagine a situation where the top star of the Sengoku period, Nobunaga, is absent. So this time, assuming a situation where Nobunaga never existed, we will analyze who would have been closest to the seat of the ruler of the realm. What would happen to the situation surrounding the Oda of Owari and the Imagawa of Suruga Totomi? In a world without Nobunaga, how would each Sengoku daimyo move? First, let's look at Owari, where Nobunaga would originally have been. In Sengoku-era Owari, the Shiba clan existed as the Shugo governor, but they declined due to continuous wars, and by the time of Yoshimune and Yoshikane, they were puppets of the Kyosu Oda clan. Meanwhile, it was Oda Nobunaga, a vassal of the Kyosu Oda clan, who expanded his power by controlling Aetsuda and He actively sent troops to Mikawa and Owari, growing as a Sengoku. Nobunaga died in 1552. Originally, Nobunaga would have succeeded him, but presumably, his younger brother Nobuyuki would inherit the family headship. Although Nobuyuki's character is not clearly transmitted, it is highly likely that he would carry on his late father's will. That was to make peace with the Imagawa clan in the east and completely cede Mikawa to them. Also, he would likely build a surprisingly good relationship with his masters, the Kyosu Oda family. He would likely manage his territory within his means while maintaining safety in the east. In other words, in an Owari without Nobunaga, no significant wars would likely occur. Instead of unifying Owari, the situation where the Kyosu Oda ruled the lower 4 districts, and the Iwakura Oda ruled the upper 4 districts would continue. Also, Shiba Yoshimune, who was originally assassinated for communicating with Nobunaga, should remain a puppet in Kyosu Castle. On the other hand, what about the situation in Suruga and Totomi, ruled by the Imagawa clan? The Battle of Okehazama in 1560 originally started from the struggle for Mikawa between Oda Nobunaga and Imagawa Yoshimoto. As long as Nobuyuki and Yoshimoto are in a peaceful relationship, no war can occur. Also, there is a theory that Yoshimoto did not have the ambition to aim for the whole country. Even regarding the Battle of Okehazama, some point out that he was merely trying to stabilize Mikawa. In that case, Yoshimoto has no justification to attack Owari, and even if he moved, it would only be to support one side if internal conflict broke out between the Kyosu and Iwakura Oda clans. The Tokai region in a world without Nobunaga might have been surprisingly peaceful. The situation in the Kenai region deepens in chaos. Let's turn our eyes from here to the Kenai. In the Kenai, the political situation had been in turmoil since the ACO disturbance in the early 16th century. Starting with the internal split of the Hosokawa clan, it expanded into a civil war involving surrounding powers. And the shogun's real power was as good as gone. Amidst this, it was Miyoshi Nagayoshi who quelled the confusion in Kenai and became the ruler. Nagayoshi, who expanded his power, secured a sphere of influence covering 10 provinces by 1561, effectively taking a position to rule the realm. However, the Miyoshi clan's power base was surprisingly weak, and anti-Miyoshi forces continued to rebel, making it far from a stable political foundation. Furthermore, misfortune struck the Miyoshi clan. Nagayoshi's younger brothers and heir died one after another, and in 1564, Nagayoshi himself died of illness. With the death of the charismatic leader who led the clan, the Miyoshi clan instantly fell into internal division. Then, a civil war breaks out between Matsunaga Hisahide and the Miyoshi triumvirate. Although the triumvirate side was initially advantageous, the battle deepened in chaos as Yoshitsugu, the heir of Miyoshi, sided with Hisahide. However, the triumvirate, having a base in Shikaku, had significant military power and further brought out Ashikaga Yoshihide as the new shogun. Eventually, Hisahide and Yoshitsugu, receiving a subjugation order issued by Yoshihide, became increasingly disadvantaged. Originally, Nobunaga's march to Kyoto would happen at this point, but such an event cannot happen. Here, the triumvirate, having cornered Hisahide and Yoshitsugu, played their trump card. They planned Yoshitsugu's disinheritance and brought out Nagayasu, who had succeeded the Sanuki Sogo clan. The headship of the Sogo clan would be succeeded by his younger brother Masayuki. In this situation, the triumvirate, having established a shogun and a new successor for Miyoshi, has nothing to fear. They would mobilize a large army to force submission, and Hisahide and Yoshitsugu would either be killed or flee. For Hisahide, there should be a last resort of sheltering the wandering Ashikaga Yoshiaki, but the wise Yoshiaki would likely not agree. Thus, the Miyoshi triumvirate, based in Awa and Sanuki, grasps the real power in Kinai, but it likely won't last long. The Miyoshi clan, possessing only a fragile foundation, would cause internal strife again at some point, and the confusion in Kinai would likely never converge. Would Uesugi Kenshin actually make a move? Now, let's turn our eyes to the Hokuriku region. Ashikaga Yoshiaki, who escaped Kinai during the Araku incident, moved from Omi to Wakasa and Ekizan, seeking protection and the restoration of the shogunate. There was an option to rely on Matsunaka Hisahide, but Hisahide's heir, Hisamichi, was the executioner who killed his brother Yoshiteru, so he couldn't trust them. So he relied on Asakura Yoshikage of Ikesan to open a path to Kyoto. However, the relied upon Yoshikage was hostile to the Iki and Kaga to his rear, and was in a state where he couldn't move immediately. Still, Yoshiaki did not give up hope, and mediated a peace between Asakura and the Iki, realizing it. Furthermore, he reported to the imperial court to promote Yoshikage's mother to junior second rank and appoint Yoshikage as Kanri Dai, actively pushing him forward. Even so, Yoshikage's heavy waist did not lift. Yoshiaki, whose stay in Ekison had become long-term, grew impatient but was finally thrust into despair. Yoshikage's heir, Ayumaro, died young, and Yoshikage sank into the depths of despair. Yoshikage completely lost motivation and was no longer in a state to march to Kyoto. At this point, staying in Ekison was useless. Yoshiaki had previously requested cooperation for marching to Kyoto from Uesugi Kenshin of Ichigo, and he realized that Uesugi was the only one left to rely on. Kenshin was a pure shogun sympathizer, and he thought he would surely stand up for the legitimate Yoshiaki. Historically, Yoshiaki received protection under Nobunaga a few months later, but here he decides to go to Yoshiaki left Ekizan and was welcomed into Kasugiyama Castle, but he faced an even harsher reality here. While Takeda and Hojo were eyeing Ichigo, Kenshin was waging a desperate struggle with the Echu Iko Iki, and furthermore, Honjo Shejinaga was in the midst of a rebellion in northern Aki. In a state with enemies on all sides, raising an army to march to Kyoto was a dream within a dream. Still, Yoshiaki desperately proposed peace to Takeda and Hojo, but made no progress at all. As long as the essential Kenshin does not nod in agreement, those efforts would end in vain. Whether in a world where Nobunaga existed, or one where he didn't, Uesugi Kenshin would likely not move. He had taken on too many enemies, and was stuck with no way out. Was it possible for Takeda Shingen and his son Yoshinobu to take the realm? Next, let's look at the Takeda clan of Kai. Because Nobunaga is not there, Imagawa Yoshimoto, who would have originally died in the Battle of Okehazama, is alive and well. Therefore, Takeda Shingen's invasion of Suruga, which happened in history, has not materialized. Also, the tripartite alliance between Takeda, Imagawa, and Hojo would be highly effective. And one more thing, as long as the relationship with the Imagawa clan doesn't change, the behavior of Shingen's heir, Yoshinobu, should not change either. This is because Yoshinobu, who can be called Promagawa, has no reason to rebel, so the Yoshinobu incident that happened in history is impossible. And there will be no rift in the parent-child relationship with Shingen. In other words, as long as the relationship between Takeda and Imagawa is good, Yoshinobu's position as successor is unshakable. Now, for Shingen, whose muddy conflict with Uesugi has settled down, his targets are limited to West Kazuk, or the Mino direction. The invasion of West Kazuk, which had been proceeding since 1557, concluded with the fall of Minowa Castle 10 years later. Territorial expansion to the east reached its final stage, and this time, he would want to aim west, as in history. If Ashikaga Yoshiaki flowed from Ekizan to Ekigo, and then to Kai, Shingen would gain a great justification, but would it go well? As long as Imagawa Yoshimoto controls regions like Suruga, Totomi, and Mikawa, he cannot aim for Kyoto from the Tokai region. In the end, there is only the case of invading from southern Shinano through Kiso and then East Mino. Fortunately, Shingen's strategy worked, and the Toyama clan governing East Mino had been submitting to Takeda since around 1555. Then, is it possible to conquer the center of Mino using Iwamura Castle in East Mino as a base? It is premature to think so. The route from Suwa to Kiso, and then through Nakatsugawa to Iwamura, corresponds to the Nakasendo of the Edo period, but it wasn't developed until the end of the Sengoku period. At that time, it did not function as a highway, and the passage of a large army was impossible. Historically, only 3,000 soldiers passed through when Akiyama Torishige invaded, and during the conquest of Koshu, the forces of Mori Nagayoshi and others passed through here, but it was still only about 3,000. Since a large army of tens of thousands would have to cross rugged paths with many steep passes, even if they advanced west from East Mino, they wouldn't be able to sustain it. After all, the straight-line distance from Suwa to Iwamura alone is 150 kilometers, so logistics and supply lines would be uncertain. Furthermore, since the Saito clan is entrenched in Mino, even if they reached the center of Mino, 20,000 enemy soldiers would be waiting. Would Shingen and Yoshinobu really take that much risk? Even if they protected Yoshiaki, it would likely just result in being blocked on all sides. In a world where Nobunaga does not exist, Takeda's conquest of the realm would also likely end as a dream. Could the great daimyo of the West, the Mori clan, take the realm? Finally, let's look at the other strong candidate, the Mori clan. Mori Motonari built up a domain covering 10 provinces in Sanyo and Sanan in just one generation. Up to this point, the Mori clan should have been the Sengoku daimyo closest to taking the realm. However, in the east, they were plagued by the Imago remnant army, and in the west, they were busy with the struggle for hegemony in northern Kyushu against the Otomo clan. In other words, they were forced into an inconvenient two-front war. Then Motonari chose the wisest policy. Taking the opportunity of Uchi Teruhiro's rebellion in 1569, he decided to abandon northern Kyushu. This was to direct all military forces to the east and defeat the Uchi remnant army, including Yamanaka. However, shortly after, Motonari died of illness, and his grandson Teramoto succeeded to the Mori clan headship. The late Motonari had immediately built a two-rivers system centered on Teramoto, so he succeeded in inheriting the house without much confusion. However, the head Teramoto was still young, and the spark of conflict with the Otomo clan remained. Although they managed to drive the Imago Restoration Army to the east, they couldn't move for a while. In the midst of this, Ashikaga Yoshiaki, who gave up persuading Uesugi Kenshin, comes to rely on the Mori clan. Originally, he had issued a request to march to Kyoto to the Mori clan in 1568, but for Yoshiaki, who had relied on Asokura and Uesugi, Mori was now his last hope. If he were refused, his dream of becoming shogun would vanish. Also, the Mori clan could not treat a noble seed who relied on them poorly. Yoshiaki welcomed Otomo in Bingo, immediately met with Teramoto, and urged him to raise an army to march to Kyoto. However, Teramoto would surely be perplexed. His late grandfather left a will of non-expansion of territory, and the Otomo Restoration Army might raise an army. Above all, he was concerned about the movements of Otomo Soren in his rear. It is not something a 19-year-old young lord could decide. He only answered that he would consult with his two uncles. So Yoshiaki proposed a condition. He proposed to make Otomo agree to peace, eliminating the threat from the west for Mori. Even if it's peace, I don't think Otomo Soren would bite for free. Surprisingly, he declared that upon becoming shogun, he would report to the throne to promote Lord Otomo to Daizai Daini. Although Yoshiaki isn't shogun yet, so it's just an empty promise. However, Soren took this offer. After all, Daizai Daini meant the effective top of Dazafu. It was a coveted rank that the Shoni clan and Uchi Yoshitaka had been appointed to in the past, and it was a perfect justification for ruling Kyoto. It has no actual effect, but since Soren is also from a noble family, his desire for high status is the same. Thus, the Mori clan, having achieved peace with the Otomo clan, finally turned its eyes to the east. Since there is no barrier called Nobunaga, the powers in the east are all small. Daimyo Teramoto would first ally with Yamana, Sukatoyo of Tajima to seal the movements of the Imago remnants and stabilize the Sanan region. Next, in Busan he actively supported Yukita Naoi to oppose the Uragami clan, destroying Uragami Munkage in 1574. With this, the invasion route from Harima to Kyoto was secured. Also, within Harima Kodera Masamoto and Besso Nagaharu would likely rush to Yoshiaki and join the army. Eventually, around 1576, they would clash with the Miyoshi clan, which still held power in Ken. The first battle might occur around Setsu, but the Miyoshi clan would likely be weakened by repeated internal conflicts. They probably wouldn't be a match for the Mori army. Yoshiaki entered Kyoto and became the 15th shogun, and Teramoto might be appointed as the shogunate. However, although the Miyoshi clan was driven out of Kinai, they still secured many bases in Kinai, and large forces were waiting in their home provinces of Sanuki and Awa. Could the Mori clan really maintain a stable regime? That would depend more on the caliber of Kikawa Motoharu and Kobayaka Takakage than on Summary. This time, we simulated a world where Nobunaga did not exist. Looking around at the famous Sengoku daimyo of the time, none possessed the decisiveness to march to Kyoto.